Today, let's talk about the different pattern making papers and how to use them for pattern drafting. So if you're a beginner and you're just learning how to draft patterns, so watch this tutorial so that you don't get confused. You know what type of pattern papers to buy and how to use these pattern papers. Now, if you already make patterns on your own, you already draft patterns, and maybe you just want to see what other people use for pattern drafting, stay also to the end. Maybe you will learn one or two things from this tutorial, okay? So I'm going to walk you through the pattern making papers that I use for drafting my own patterns. So we're going to start with the first one now. The first one here is the white paper. This is a white paper roll. Now this white paper is just like an A4 paper. The texture is just like the way A4 paper feels. It's just like that. The only difference is that this is wider, is in a roll, so that it can accommodate large garments. So if you want to make like a full dress, a long dress, so you just roll it out and then you can draft your pattern in a roll, as against it being in sheet. There are some that comes in sheet, then you have to stick your pattern papers together and it takes a bit more time. So that is why I usually prefer buying my white paper in a roll to accommodate large pattern pieces for me. Okay, so for this white paper like this, I use it to draft my patterns. So this is an example. This is a pattern I've drafted before. So I draft my patterns just like this with my white paper roll, and then you can also use other kinds of paper to draft your patterns like this. For example, you can use the brand paper. If you don't have the white paper to draft your patterns, you can also use the brand paper. So I also use the brand paper at times. But now the difference between these is, for the brand paper, the width of the brand paper is usually shorter. And as such, it doesn't really contain large pattern pieces. Then I have to start joining them or sticking the papers together. So that is why you don't see me using this brand paper often, okay? But you can still use it. It is something that can still be used for drafting patterns, all right? Plus, sometimes when I draft on the brand paper, it is not as clear as when I draft on the white paper. So when I draft on the white paper, you can see all my marker pens, everything. It's so clear. It looks neater. It looks more professional. That is for me. But if you choose to draft on the brand paper, that is also fine. Now there's another paper too that you can use in drafting your patterns, and that is the dotted paper, the dot paper. You can use the dot paper to draft your patterns as well. I hardly really use the dot paper to draft my patterns. The reason is because it is a bit pricey for me. It is a bit expensive, so I really don't use that at all. Not that it is not nice. It is nice. It's a good paper with all of the numbers and everything in it. It's easy for you to draft patterns on it. But because it's on the high side, I run away from it a little bit. So I use this regular white paper roll. And if you buy it in a roll, it's a lot cheaper. Or I use the brand paper if I don't have the white paper. Okay? So once you finish drafting your patterns like this, and you've made all your corrections and everything, then you can take your other pattern, your tracing paper. So for tracing out my patterns, I use this tracing paper. It is transparent, or you can see through it. That's what I mean. So I also buy this in a roll too, because one, it is really wide in a roll. Although you have smaller, there are smaller sizes, but I usually don't like buying those smaller sizes at all. It's waste of money for me. So I usually prefer to buy it in a roll because I draft patterns every time. So when I buy it in a roll, it's a lot cheaper and it lasts me for longer. So for this particular tracing paper, you can place it under. This is what it's used for. You don't use this to draft patterns, because if you draft patterns on it, it's not going to show very well. You're going to find it difficult to see it. But when you draft patterns on your white paper like this, now you can place this tracing paper over it. Now, if you see, you will notice that when you place your tracing paper over it, you see that it is see-through. You can see everything on it. So you can take your ruler, your pencil, and then you can trace out your individual pattern pieces from all of this. Now, once you trace out your individual pattern pieces, for example, let's assume the pocket, you trace out the pocket, you trace out the bodies. Once you trace out everything like that, then you can now add in their seam allowance separately. So whenever I trace them out, I add my seam allowance on this tracing paper. Okay, so this is really very nice for tracing out your patterns, and because it's see-through, it's even a lot nicer. Some people will argue that why do you have to now trace out your patterns, use the tracing paper to trace out your patterns, that it is waste of paper? Well, they may say, why don't you just add your seam allowance to this your master draft and then cut them out? Well, sometimes it's possible, but most times it is not possible for you to just add your seam allowance on your master draft. The reason is because on your master draft, you may have up to 3, 4, or even more patterns that you need to trace out. So for example, you have, this is a pocket. We have to trace out this pocket so that we can add seam allowance. Now we have the pocket flap as well. We need to trace this out to add the seam allowance. Then we have the button extension. We also need to trace that out so that we can add the seam allowance. And then we have the body, the overall body for it. So you see there are about 4 pattern pieces here. So it's not just easy for us to just trace out, for us to just add seam allowance to this part and then cut it out. We need to trace out these smaller pattern pieces inside the pattern, the master draft. So that is why this tracing paper is really very important. It's good for us to have this tracing paper so we can trace out all the individual pattern pieces. Moreover, I also personally don't like to cut my master draft. The reason is because I like to save my master draft so that in case I want to make other modifications to this same pattern, maybe I want to change the neckline, or maybe I want to change just something small in it, I can bring out my master draft, do the alterations or do the modification on my master draft, and then place my tracing paper over it and trace it out. Okay, now if you're not someone who drafts patterns from scratch, maybe you use commercial patterns and you don't want to cut your commercial patterns, you can also still use this tracing paper for it. So you can take your commercial pattern. This is an example of a commercial pattern that I have. So you can take it and then you spread it out just like this. And then you place this your transparent tracing paper on it just like so. Make sure you iron your tissue paper so that it will remove all the creases before you start tracing. So you see, you can place it like this and then you trace out your size of the pattern that you want, and then you are still able to preserve this your pattern without having to damage it. And then if you need to make any modification to this pattern, maybe you want to do full bust adjustment, or you want to do other kinds of modification, change necklines and things like that, you can correct them on this tracing paper. Now once you correct them, then you cannot cut them out, the individual pattern pieces, and then you cut them out before you place them on your fabric and then cut them out. Nice, right? Okay. quite like this tracing paper, apart from the fact that it's transparent, you can see through it. I like it because you can preserve the patterns. Once you trace out your patterns and then you cut them out, you can easily keep these patterns. You can preserve these patterns and reuse them, because if you see, it is not very light. It is something that does not easily tear, so you can preserve your patterns. Unlike the tissue that can easily tear, this particular tracing paper does not easily tear at all. So I have preserved patterns. Most of my patterns, I've preserved them and I've reused these patterns several times without it being torn, still looking really very nice. And the next one is this hard paper roll. Now you can see that the paper roll is like a hard cardboard. It's strong. So for this particular paper, we don't use this one to draft patterns. So we use this to make blocks or slopers. So this is the paper roll that I actually use in making my blocks. So these are blocks. You see the bodice block and the sleeve block. Whatever blocks I'm making, the pants block, the jacket blocks, the skirt blocks, whatever blocks I'm making, I just put them on this. The reason why we had to use this, or why I use this for making blocks, anyway, it is what pattern makers use generally for making their blocks. The reason why I use this is because it is very durable. Like, you can trace your block patterns on this and then you can save them and reuse them. You can trace them and modify them for a long time. The ones I've had, like some of these bodies that I've had, blocks that I've had, I've used them for more than 5 years. I just bring them out, trace around the block, and then start drafting my patterns. So if you want to make blocks, or you want to make patterns that you want to keep for a long time, or that you want to make permanent, it is better for you to use this hard cardboard roll. Although this cardboard roll also sometimes comes in sheets, but I also prefer to get it in a roll. You already know why I like to get it in a roll, because getting it in a roll, you can make large blocks from it, large garment blocks from it, without having to stick them together. So that's why I always prefer to get in a roll. And plus, when you get it in a roll, it's usually a lot cheaper. Okay, so these are the pattern papers I actually use for my pattern drafting. I know that some people, some pattern makers, they also use some different kinds of papers. You know, some people use the tissue, some other people use newspapers, and some use magazines and things like that. But if that is what you have and you cannot afford these papers, you can use whatever you have. But trust me, when you use these papers, your patterns will look very professional. They will look clean and neat, and then you can keep them for future use. So if you're not low on budget or not tight on budget, you can consider getting some of these papers to enhance your pattern making and to make them look more professional. Okay. All right, so if you know of any other pattern making papers that I didn't mention here, please drop them in the comment section. Okay, if you're wondering where I got these pattern papers, I got all of them from Amazon. So I'm going to drop the link in the description box below, so that if you're interested, you can go check them out. I also know that some of these papers, they come in different thickness. I've tried some before and I didn't quite like them, not necessarily because they are fake, but because they are a bit thin. So I've tried some of the tracing paper. I've got some that are really thin, and because I like to keep my patterns, sometimes they tear, although they may be a little bit cheaper, but then they don't last long. Okay, so that is why I'm using this particular set. All right, and that's why I decided to share them with you. If you found 1 or 2 things useful in this video, please let me know in the comment section. All right, so and that will be all for this class. If you have any questions about the papers you want to ask, please drop them in the description box below. Or if you have any suggestion, or you have any tutorial you would like me to make, just let me know in the comment section. All right, if you have not already subscribed yet, please do well to hit the subscribe button now. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you again in my next class. Bye bye.